From the almost the very first at St. Chrysostom's, women's activities got a fair amount of publicity. When St. Chrysostom's began, it was in a storefront on Clark Street, a few blocks north of this area, but they still, in the fall of 1893, there were stories in the society columns in the Tribune about the women having a sale, and because there was no building, there was no parish house, and so they had the sale in their home of one of the members. In early 1894, the congregation is starting to raise money for a permanent building, and one of the first presentations that is made on this is to what was called the Ladies' Society. And a short time later, they had a parish meeting, and 7 women were among the donors, and they formed a committee to raise additional funds. Rector, 3 men and 3 women. So they were not simply limited to the sales and bazaars, which were, of course, for many years a very important part of the program. In December 1903, the women came up with the idea of making a Christmas gift to the rector, who was at that time the Reverend Thaddeus Snively, and the gift was to repaint the interior of the church. And they couldn't surprise him with the gift because they wanted to know what color he preferred, and he chose dark red. He remained in the congregation until 1907, and his successor came a few months later and had the parish purchase a building on Dearborn in the block south of the church that could be used as a rectory and parish house, and he hoped to start a children's program there. And the women put on a spring sale to raise money for this program. Unfortunately, just a short time after this sale, the rector left under a cloud of accusations of alcoholism and other behavior which was not specified. His successor, Norman Hutton, came at a time when things were very bad in the congregation, but he was looking for a position that had more of a challenge, and he was quite willing to come in spite of the difficulties, and he immediately started turning things around. One of the early projects at the church was building a parish house attached to the building. It includes what's now the Harding Room and the space above and below it. And the women, as well as the boys group, did apparently some of the physical work involved. And when the building was completed in 1913, the first event scheduled there was the Women's Annual Bazaar. A woman looked back on these times. She was interviewed in the 1930s, and she said that in spite of small membership and many drawbacks, the work went vigorously on. Besides the sewing, we often gave parish suppers and other social events, even entertaining in our time the Diocesan Women's Auxiliary. And that visit was no small event because it was recorded that there were over 600 people that came for the service and lunch. There was, besides the regular women's group, there was a mother's club, apparently small children, and you could bring your children to the meetings. And they did sewing for institutions and for the Red Cross. And there were two groups for girls, I presume teenage, early 20s, though it's not specified. One met after school, and the other met in the evenings for convenience of business girls, as it was said in the bulletin. And that was a branch of a national group, the Girls Friendly Society, and they sponsored a strawberry social at one time, and during World War II, the members knit and made bandages. There was a men's club that started at, I don't know when, but it was in existence by 1911, and they met in the evenings, and they often had, the evenings were often described as smokers. The Tribune had a great story on February 15th about a meeting that had taken place the previous night. Speaker with the wonderful name of Judge Fred Fake, and his topic included the statement, few persons can appreciate the sufferings of bank presidents who are compelled to serve prison terms. Frequently, men of good instincts get the impetus for a criminal career from the first term in jail. One hopes that this had no relevance to any of the members of the congregation. And later in the year, the meeting took place on the night of Election Day, and one of the parishioners at St. Chrysostom's was the president of the Chicago Telephone Company, and he arranged to have telephone reports on the results at the meeting. And that the group may have gone under at the time of World War I, I don't know for sure. They tried to revive it in 1927, but it didn't really take root again. There was a young men's group called the Knights of Washington, and it was apparently a national Episcopal group, and they had a chapter at St. Chrysostom's, and they sponsored New Year's Eve dances, which were apparently quite pleasant. And the women kept on with the bazaar, but the men took some part as well, because there was always a rector's table, and men would either donate articles that might be useful for it or would make a contribution, and this went on for about 20 years. When World War I came, every issue of the parish magazine listed an honor roll of people who were either in the military or in war-related service, and there was a good list of women as well as men. One of the magazines has a very moving letter from a young woman who was a nurse in France, and she described about how they'd hear the ambulances driving up and know they had to be ready for new patients, and a very moving story about a man that she had cared for who had died, and his mother wrote later and said that he had written to her about how kind this nurse had been to him, and she appreciated it so much. And some of the women in the congregation who were not nurses or one served at the YMCA in parish, and another was with the American Fund for the French Wounded. After the war ended, the church had grown dramatically in attendance, and there had been plans in early 1917 to raise money and enlarge the church, which of course were put on hold when the war came. A mission committee of the congregation had been appointed in late 1916 to consider what we would now call outreach programs. And they had, that included both men and women, and they had come up with the idea of having after-school program for children. And when the war was over and the church was able to resume expansion plans, one thing that I think was very nice was that they chose to have the parish house expansion first so they could start the program rather than do the church first. And by 1922, the construction of this part of the building that we're sitting in now, linking the church to the two buildings to the south, which were houses that the church had bought and remodeled for use as residential space and a parish office. After World War I, it was the church had been considering expanding the building and was about to begin a campaign in 1917, but obviously that wasn't going to work during World War I, so they gave it up and put it on hold. And when they started again in 1919 and 1920, the architect Edward Bennett, who had been Daniel Burnham's partner, said he would not give a monetary pledge, but he did a rough drawing of linking the church. There had been a house on the space that's now the courtyard, and he suggested tearing this down, constructing the what is the present guild room, harding room, and gym to link the space with the two houses just south of the church, which the parish had purchased and converted into one building for parish office and residential space. And the work began on the parish house first because they wanted to use this for the after-school program for children that the missionary committee had recommended. And work was not completed by the end of 1922, but there was enough space that the women could use it for their bazaar. In 1925, the church was enlarged, and one thing that is perhaps not related to women's activities in the church, but which I think is very much worth noting, is that the 4 large stained glass windows on the north aisle are all of women saints. St. Mary the Virgin with the child Jesus, St. Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist, and Saints Mary and Martha of Bethany, and St. Mary of Bethany, some people believe and some people don't, is the same person as Mary Magdalene. But Connick, the firm that did the stained glass, chose to represent her as Mary Magdalene because that meant there were many more things you could do with the window, and you could have scenes and symbols relating to both people. Norman Hutton, who had been rector for nearly 20 years, retired for health reasons at just before the end of 1928. And his successor, Henry Pryor Allman Abbott, started a new program for younger women in which they met weekly to roll bandages for hospitals. He only stayed a few months, and I don't know if the program outlasted him or not. He also started weekday celebrations, would not have been called the Eucharist then, but Holy Communion. And one of them was on the morning of the weekly meeting of the Women's Guild. His successor, Stephen Keeler, also did not stay very long. Abbott had been elected bishop after just a few months at St. Chrysostom's and left, and Keeler stayed about 2 years, and then he was also elected bishop. Perhaps because of the Depression, they didn't have a bazaar in 1929, but it was resumed in 1930. And he gave meditations at a quiet day for the Diocesan Episcopal Church women. His successor, Dudley Stark, left to become a bishop, but did not do that for 18 years. And he came in 1932, and the Women's Guild was very active during his time there. And his wife came up with a new idea for the bazaar. In the Depression, where people didn't have a lot of discretionary income, and where the bazaar where the women made things was apparently not considered a feasible idea, she suggested something called Christmas windows. And the current day school fair operates much the same way. You get stores to provide their products for sale and take space for it. And this was apparently very popular and would last for 2 days. And a big turkey dinner was always the highlight of the event on the second day, and there would be entertainment following the dinner, which apparently must have been great fun. I would have loved to see the year where organist Harold Simons posed with somebody else and representing Grant Wood's American Gothic. The community center had had a paid director when it started, but during the Depression they couldn't afford this, and it ended up that they got women volunteers from the congregation to take that over. New program in 1937, more women were working outside the home, and they had a group called the Business and Professional Women's Guild, which met once a month, and they had dinner and a speaker. And that lasted on into the late 50s, though it was put on hiatus during World War II. The parish ran a servicemen's center in World War II. They were open 5 evenings a week, Wednesday through Sunday, and they had they had a jukebox and you could dance, and they had you could play at the basketball in the gym, and they had various activities, and women from the congregation were encouraged to sign up as hostesses, and they took people outside the parish as well, but only if you had a recommendation from your pastor. And a lot of happy romances developed from this, including one that you might not have expected. One of the women who was a hostess, it was not a military man that she fell in love with, but it was the sexton at St. Chrysostom's. And they were married and had a very happy marriage until his death. Under the brief tenure, when Abbott's brief tenure, he encouraged expansion of the Alder Guild, and by the late 1940s, there was a young adults group that was quite active, and the Alder Guild, at I think Dudley Stark's suggestion, invited women members of that group to join the Alder Guild. And although at first they were kind of kept doing some of the more mundane jobs, at least 2 members of that group stayed on and later ended up becoming presidents of the Alder Guild. When Stark left to become Bishop of Rochester in 1950, his successor was his assistant, the Reverend Cuthbert Pratt. This would not now be allowed, and it wasn't too common at that time, but it was it could be done, and I think this was because the vestry knew that he was equally strong, low church person as his predecessor. And he very much kept on with programs that had been going on in the past, and the women's activities were very similar to what they had been since the 30s. The proceeds from the sales, some went to support the community center, and in 1955, when the parish kitchen was remodeled, the women paid half the cost of that. Coffee hours, the first official one was in 1954. The World Council of Churches was having an ecumenical meeting in Evanston, and it was thought that maybe some of the visitors would come, and the American Bar Association convention was taking place in Chicago at the same time, and so there was a feeling that it might be nice to have this welcome these people with a coffee hour. And this was very well received, but because of the facilities at the church, it did not become immediately a regular part of the activities, because you either, at a time when we didn't have an elevator, you either had to come upstairs after church to get your coffee, or somebody had to bring the coffee from the kitchen downstairs. And a member of the woman active in the Women's Guild named Helga Harding, and her husband Carol, who was the president of Pullman Company, both very active in the parish, loved the idea of coffee hours, and they gave money to have a kitchen put in the Harding room downstairs, which was named for them when they retired and left the city. And the room had originally had its only furnishings were some very, very uncomfortable rows of folding chairs. They were not only uncomfortable, but if you were a woman, the wood had cracked and you were apt to snag your stockings on them. And Harding, through his ties at Pullman, got some of the Pullman furniture that wasn't being used, and they were these very, very heavy chairs like they had in the old Pullman cars, so they didn't they could withstand any rough railroad crossings, but they were orders of magnitude above anything that had been had before, and so this was a very positive thing. When Bob Hall came to replace Cuthbert Pratt, Hall wanted to broaden the focus of the women's group from just concentrating on bazaars, and he added a women's Bible study and prayer group before the group's regular weekly meeting, and he supported a change of name for the group. The official name had been the Women's Guild and Auxiliary, and this was not considered a good name because the women shouldn't just be auxiliary to the parish, they were part of it like anyone else. And so in the early 60s, the group became the Women of St Chrysostom. At his encouragement, the bazaar became scaled down by the mid-60s, and it was only one instead of 2 days. And instead of the turkey dinner, there was a big every member canvas dinner, which took its place on the social calendar. And the Women of St. Chrysostom's activities expanded and included trips to other parishes and to diocesan social agencies. And as a result, many women in the congregation became more involved as board members of the social agencies, or became active in the diocesan ECW. My mother was, for several years, an officer of the diocesan ECW with responsibility for taking the reservations for the annual convention. And I can remember her sorting through all these papers on the dining room table with the reservations that came in. When the Cullys left, Martha Prey came from St. Matthew's, Evanston, to become Director of Religious Education at St. Chrysostom's, and she was the first woman to be appointed to a professional position on the parish staff. Also in the 1960s, a woman parishioner named Elizabeth Main, who was a nurse, felt the call to a new ministry encouraged by many of the women in the congregation. She began a 2-year program of deaconess training. At that time, if you were a deaconess, it was not an ordained ministry, but you were, quote, set apart. And she went through this program. I think they had it at Seabury Western, but I don't remember for sure. And in 1964, they had a special service in which she was set apart as a deaconess. 6 years later, the National Church at General Convention approved the ordination of women deacons, and they ruled that deaconesses who had gone through the training program and had been set apart, that this was the equivalent of ordination. So we can say that St. Chrysostom's had a woman ordained in 1964, 12 years before General Convention 6 years before they allowed the ordination of deacons, and 12 years before they allowed the ordination of priests. And Elizabeth spent most of her working years at the West Side Medical Center because of her nursing background, but she would sometimes, after it was ruled that she was validly ordained, would come back to St. Chrysostom's and would be able to take part in celebrations of the Eucharist, which was particularly nice. After Robert Hall left, he was succeeded by Robert Howell. Very confusing that the names were so similar. And Howell was the longest-serving rector in parish history. He came in 1967, stayed on until 1990. And he came at a time when membership in the Women of St. Chrysostom's was declining because many more women were working outside the home. And the rummage sale was discontinued somewhere about this time. I can't give you an exact date, but the work of picking up merchandise, bringing it to the church, sorting it, was physically too much for a group of older women, and they tried in the mid-70s to get the members of the then young adults group to take part and help with these jobs, but most of them were working during the day and couldn't make the pickups, so it didn't work out, and they gave it up, and it was, we've had a couple of tag sales since, but the big rummage sale was discontinued and not revived. What was, I think, not discontinued and is certainly continued until this day is that the pre-Christmas bake sale. In the Howell years, you now start seeing many more activities, general activities open to women. The diocese in the late 60s approved women as vestry members and delegates to diocesan convention, and there was a year in that period, probably late 60s, when for some reason they couldn't have one of the convention services in the cathedral, and they had it at St. Chrysostom's. And women from the congregation were there providing coffee to those who attended. And among the attendees were women delegates from other parishes, which did not sit well with some of the women in the congregation. In 1971, my mother, Dorothy Sugden Ram, became the first woman chosen as a delegate to diocesan convention. And this was an important convention because they were electing a suffragan bishop. And I remember her coming home from the meeting and telling about it And she said, well, I know who the new bishop is going to be. It's going to be the African-American candidate from Detroit, and that was Bishop Primo. And she said he had been the last speaker, and he had just, well, what he said, you could just tell that everybody had just been very much impressed. The following year, when they were slating vestry, my mother was chosen and to fill a 2-year unexpired term. And there had been previously women on vestry slates, but they had not been elected. And I remember thinking, well, they finally have got things right, because nobody is going to be able to vote against my mother. And this was, in fact, the case. She was elected unanimously. And when her 2 years were up, there was another 2-year vacancy, and she was slated for that. Nobody seemed to pay too much attention one way or the other to the fact that a woman was on the vestry. But the vestry also were asked to help take up the collection. And Mother was the first woman in that job. And she had no concern about nerves when she was going to vestry meetings, but when they first tapped her to take up the collection, she said she just was all perspiring. She was so nervous. And when she came up and they brought the plates up at the end of the offering, one of the vestry men who was next to her turned to her and said, well, we've got to do something about your hair. And she was kind of puzzled about that, and she thought she wore her hair long in a bun, and she thought maybe part of it had fallen out. And then he deadpans and he says, you're the only one up here that isn't bald. When a woman was taking up the collection, then the Ushers Guild realized that it could no longer remain men only, and in the following year there were women named to that group. And this is also a time when, in general, you're getting more lay participation in the service. And by the middle of the 1970s, the Lectors Guild was started. And this, from the very beginning, had women as well as men. And later on, when lay Eucharistic ministers began, these also included women as well as men from the beginning. First woman candidate for the ordination to the priesthood was in the 70s. Janice Gordon had been a flight attendant at Pan Am, and she started coming to the young adults group in the early 70s at St. Chrysostom's, became head of the Sunday school, and realized that she felt she had a vocation to the priesthood. She hadn't finished college, so she took college courses while continuing to work as a flight attendant, and she was hoping that by the time she was ready to attend seminary, that it would be possible for her to become a priest. And in 1976, the vestry were asked to approve her as a postulant for the ordained ministry. This was in the spring, a few months before the General Convention of 1976. And the vestry minutes say that the group expressed various views about women as priests, but they unanimously approved her as a postulant. And it was very nice that a few months later, General Convention did approve women priests, and she went to Divinity School at University of Chicago, kept on at St. Chrysostom's, and in 1980 was ordained a deacon in a service here in the church. And the following year was one of the first 4 women priests ordained in the diocese. There was still some opposition among the diocese, and the Diocesan Standing Committee was not ready to approve the ordination of women priests, but 4 bishops from other dioceses allowed their postulants to be put forward under their names, and Bishop Primo did the service, and I remember him making some comment about that thanks to the bishops of whatever the 4 dioceses were, and it was too bad they couldn't be present, and everybody laughed. And she became first, was the assistant. Janice Gordon became first assistant at St. Augustine's in Wilmette, and then later left for the Diocese of Maryland. When Bob Howell stepped down in 1990, it was then by this time the search committee process as we know it today was in place, and a woman was named chair of the search committee, Nancy Brooker. She had served on the vestry for a term, and the makeup of the committee, of which I was a member, was probably half male and half female. Ray Webster was a supporter of women's ordination. Bob Howell had also been a strong supporter of women's ordination and often preached on it. But Ray was the first to hire a woman to serve on the clergy staff. The Reverend Amy Richter had been in a parish in the Diocese of Pennsylvania, but her husband was about to start a graduate program in religion at Marquette, and she wanted a position that would be closer to Marquette, and came to Chicago for an interview and was hired. And as with the vestry expressing different opinions about ordination of women, but unanimously voting for Janice Gordon, I remember a regular in the congregation saying, well, she never really had liked the idea of women priests, but Amy was different. And one very interesting thing about Amy Richter was that she had a great deal of concern for clergy wellness issues and wanted to keep in good shape, and as a result, she regularly ran in the Chicago Marathon, which I think everybody in the congregation took a great deal of pride in. And when she left, I think throughout all the time that Ray was rector through till early 2012, we had at least one woman assistant or associate in the congregation. And women's activities continued much as they had done, but they made an impression on some of the men in the congregation, and a men's group, I think 2 men's groups, were started up in the late years that Webster was rector, and they had Saturday morning breakfast meetings, and sometimes I remember some sports event. I can't remember what it was, but I think likely one point in the March Madness basketball tournament that they were going to meet at some place that had a big screen TV coverage of the event for drinks and food. And also, one thing that has continued, I think, till the present day is that men from the parish go to an annual men's retreat at De Koven Foundation. And one thing that is, I think, very nice to note about this period, too, is that the Alder Guild had, for over 100 years, been female only. And in 2004, it began to accept male members. I was the head of the Alder Guild at this time, and I remember talking it over with Ray, and I don't know which of us came up with the idea. I thought he had, he thought I had, but the suggestion was that we have start out by having a men's team. And we got a group going, and Chuck Sanita, a member of our congregation, had been earlier had been a member of the Orthodox Church, and so he was just used to the fact that men did this kind of work, and he was delighted to join, and a number of other men did. Now we no longer have a separate men's group, but we've got a number of men who are serving. And then after Ray retired, our interim rector during the period between his departure and when Wes Smedley was called was a woman, Terry Hyduk. And she is so far the first woman to serve as rector and not associate, though she was not in a permanent position. And I remember asking one of the members of the committee, I said I hoped they had not ruled out having a woman, and they said they certainly hadn't. And at the moment, things have been, in the years since Wes has been rector, things have been going quite a bit along the same lines. We haven't seen any major changes, but we have had women clergy on the staff, and we have women serving the congregation in many capacities.